It was one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, a catastrophe that changed the course of the world. In the 14th century, a silent and invisible force spread with frightening speed, crossing continents and leaving behind grief, terror, and devastation. Entire communities were wiped out. Millions died, families shattered, civilizations brought to their knees. We remember it by many names: the Great Mortality, the Great Pestilence, and most famously, the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1353, it is estimated that between 50% and 60% of Europe's population perished. And yet, for over 6 centuries, one central mystery has loomed over the history of this disaster. Where did it actually begin? What was the origin of this horror that reshaped humanity? For the longest time, we had only theories. We assumed it came from rats in the ports of Italy, or perhaps the chaotic streets of medieval London. But the real story, the one uncovered by a combination of archaeological discovery, DNA science, and the persistence of a few dedicated researchers, takes us somewhere far more remote. It starts with a weathered slab of stone in Central Asia, and on it, a single word: pestilence. Back in 1886, a group of Russian archaeologists was digging near the village of Kara-Jigach, close to Lake Issyk-Kul in present-day Kyrgyzstan. They were excavating 2 small cemeteries used by a Christian trading community that had once flourished along the Silk Road. Dozens of graves were uncovered, and their inscriptions were dated to the years 1338 and 1339, almost a full decade before the Black Death made its first documented appearance in Europe. One gravestone caught their attention. Written in ancient Syriac, it marked the tomb of a man named Sanmak. It simply said he died of pestilence. At the time, the word pestilence was used broadly to describe deadly, mysterious illnesses, anything capable of wiping out whole villages. The archaeologists took note, recorded their findings, and sent the skeletons back to a museum in St. Petersburg. And then, like so many potential clues from the past, these remains sat in archives, untouched and largely forgotten, for more than 100 years. That is, until a Scottish historian named Philip Slavin stumbled across the old excavation records while doing research on the Black Death's economic and environmental impact. He noticed something odd: too many graves dated to the same 2-year period, and too many of them mentioning pestilence. This wasn't random. It wasn't a coincidence. What he found was evidence of a large-scale death event, possibly the first outbreak of the plague. But a hunch, even an educated one, isn't enough in science. He needed proof. And that meant DNA. At this point, Slavin connected with a team of geneticists at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany. They were already building a detailed genetic family tree for the plague bacterium, Yersinia pestis, by sequencing over 1,300 DNA samples from modern and ancient sources, rodents, humans, and more, collected from across the globe. What they'd discovered was remarkable. Somewhere around the early 1300s, the plague bacterium experienced a massive burst of evolution, a so-called Big Bang event. From one ancestral strain, 4 new major lineages emerged. One of these was responsible for the Black Death and every subsequent outbreak in Europe for the next 4 centuries. But there was a catch. The strains found in European victims of the Black Death weren't the original, they'd already mutated once or twice. That meant the ancestor had to have come from elsewhere. They just didn't know where. Yet, Slavin's discovery offered a possible lead. The remains from Kyrgyzstan had never been genetically analyzed, so a collaboration began. Working with Russian curators at the Peter the Great Museum, the team retrieved teeth from 7 skeletons buried in 1338 and 1339. Teeth, as it turns out, are ideal for preserving ancient pathogens, especially the pulp inside. And that's where things got extraordinary. Inside the dental pulp of 3 individuals, the researchers found DNA fragments that matched Yersinia pestis. It was definitive. The people buried under those tombstones really had died from plague. But there was more. When they sequenced the entire genome of the ancient bacterium and compared it to their global database, they found something astonishing. This strain wasn't just any strain. It was the ancestral strain, the root of the evolutionary explosion, the mother of them all. This tiny trading community near Lake Issyk-Kul had unknowingly been the epicenter of one of the most devastating pandemics in human history. But that raised new questions. How did this strain jump from animals to humans in the first place? What caused the spillover? The answer lies in the ecology of the region. The area around Lake Issyk-Kul is what scientists call a natural plague reservoir. The bacterium circulates quietly among wild rodents like marmots and gerbils. Occasionally, under the right conditions, it spills over into humans, and researchers believe that's exactly what happened around 1338. A sudden climate shift may have led to a spike in rodent populations. More rodents meant more fleas. More fleas meant more opportunities for the bacteria to jump species. A single marmot hunted for food or fur could have been the fatal link. Once the plague crossed that invisible boundary, leaping from animal to human, it only needed one more ingredient to become a global catastrophe: movement. And that's exactly what this small Kyrgyz settlement offered. These weren't isolated villagers tucked away in the mountains. They were part of a bustling Silk Road outpost. Traders, merchants, caravans flowing east and west, loaded with silk, spices, ceramics, and coins. The graves themselves tell this story. Artifacts buried alongside the dead came from as far as Iran and the Indian Ocean. These people were plugged into a vast web of commerce that stretched from China to Constantinople. Now imagine the scene. A trader dies unexpectedly, then another, then entire families. Meanwhile, their caravans are still departing. Inside bundles of fabric or tucked into grain sacks are stowaways, rats. And on those rats, fleas now infected with plague. These caravans don't stop. They follow ancient routes westward, stopping at oases, fortresses, and towns, unwittingly carrying death with them. This wasn't a single explosion. It was a slow, creeping fire, burning its way west, one rodent, one flea, one host at a time. Eventually, that chain of infection reached the shores of the Black Sea and a port city called Caffa, today known as Feodosia, in Crimea. In 1346, it became ground zero for one of the most harrowing scenes in the history of biological warfare. The Mongol army was laying siege to Caffa, but disease broke out among their troops. Instead of retreating, they used it as a weapon. According to accounts from the time, they loaded the plague-ridden corpses of their own soldiers into catapults and launched them over the city walls. Panic swept through Caffa. Merchants and sailors fled the city, desperate to escape. But by then, it was too late. The rats and fleas had already boarded the ships. From there, the plague rode the waves of the Mediterranean. Genoese ships, their hulls hiding infected stowaways, docked in Messina, in Sicily. And from Messina, it moved like a shadow through Europe, first to Marseille, then Paris, London, and beyond. Town after town collapsed into horror. Death became a daily part of life. What made Europe particularly vulnerable wasn't just bad luck. It was environment and timing. Cities were densely packed and shockingly unhygienic. Human and animal waste filled the streets. Rats were everywhere. The plague had found its perfect playground. But what makes this story extraordinary isn't just the scale of the suffering. It's how such a devastating event can now be traced back, step by step, through stone inscriptions, archival notes, and strands of DNA locked in molars for 700 years. Thanks to this multidisciplinary detective work, combining history, archaeology, paleogenetics, and climate science, we now know exactly where the spark was struck. A forgotten cemetery in Kyrgyzstan has become one of the most important archaeological sites of the 21st century. It tells us not just when and where the Black Death began, but how global trade, ecology, and microscopic life intersected in one fateful moment. This changes our understanding of pandemics. The Black Death was not random. It was the result of ecological pressure, zoonotic transmission, and human connectivity. The same forces that allowed us to build empires also left us exposed to invisible enemies. And those same forces are still at work today. As we continue to expand our cities, push into wild habitats, and build global supply chains, the chance of another pandemic rises. COVID-19 was not the first global disease, and it won't be the last. But now at least we have better tools. We have genome sequencing, climate models, historical databases, and yes, even ancient cemeteries to teach us. Each grave is a lesson, each tooth a time capsule, and in this case, one particular grave, San Max, gave us more than a name and a date. It gave us a beginning. Let that settle in for a moment. A single engraved word carved into stone nearly 700 years ago, pestilence, led modern scientists to the origins of one of history's greatest killers. It's a humbling reminder of how long the past can lie in silence, waiting for the right question to be asked. And when the answer finally comes, it can change everything. Now that we've traced the beginning, there's something deeper to explore, the ripple effects. The Black Death didn't just kill, it transformed. In the wake of the plague, medieval Europe was never the same. Entire towns were abandoned. Fields went unharvested. Cathedrals stood half-finished. Whole professions vanished almost overnight. But from that chaos came an unexpected shift. A new world began to take shape. Labor shortages gave peasants and workers rare leverage. For the first time in centuries, people could demand better wages, better conditions, even the right to move freely, something previously restricted by feudal law. In many regions, the rigid structures of feudalism began to crack. The psychological toll was just as dramatic. People lived with death as a daily companion. Art became darker, more urgent. Skeletons danced in murals. Churches depicted saints surrounded by rotting corpses. Religious faith wavered for some, deepened for others. Entire movements sprang up in response to the suffering, some offering solace, others seeking scapegoats. And yet, while the cultural memory of the Black Death was unmistakable, its true point of origin had always remained obscure. Until now. The convergence of disciplines that made this discovery possible is something worth appreciating. Think about it. This was not just a genetic study or an archaeological dig. It was a collaboration that spanned centuries and specialties. An 1886 excavation, a 21st century historian, a team of geneticists, and a museum archive frozen in time. All of them unknowingly holding pieces of the same puzzle. And when those pieces were finally brought together, what emerged wasn't just an answer. It was a new kind of history, one built not only on words and documents, but on molecules, on isotopes, on ancient pathogens whispering through the pulp of a tooth. This is the new frontier of historical research. No longer are we limited to written records or oral traditions. We now have the tools to extract secrets directly from the bones of the past. And with that power comes responsibility. Because just as we can look backward, we must also look forward. Understanding the Black Death's origins isn't just about satisfying academic curiosity, it's about recognizing patterns. Zoonotic spillover, the jump of disease from animals to humans, is not some medieval oddity. It's happening right now, all over the world. SARS, MERS, Ebola, COVID-19, all emerged from similar ecological conditions. Deforestation, climate shifts, rapid urbanization, globalized travel, these are the forces that bring us closer to disease reservoirs. Just like in 1338, a boom in rodent populations or changes in climate can set off a chain reaction. But unlike in the 14th century, today that chain can reach the other side of the world in hours, not years. The lesson from Kul is clear. Pandemics have always been part of the human story, especially when we're connected across continents. Trade, travel, conquest, and migration, these aren't just vehicles for culture and commerce. They're also pathways for pathogens. But with every lesson, there's also resilience. The people of medieval Europe suffered, yes, but they also adapted. They reorganized. They survived. And we are their descendants. The very fact that you're watching this now is a testament to that resilience. So, when we study the Black Death, not as a legend or horror story, but as a real biological historical phenomenon, we do more than revisit tragedy. We reconnect with our species' deepest challenge, how to endure the invisible forces of nature and emerge stronger. That's why discoveries like this one matter, because buried in a forgotten cemetery in the mountain shadows of Central Asia, we didn't just find bones, we found a mirror. And if we look closely enough, we might just see our own reflection staring back. There's something poetic, almost eerie, about how history decided to leave us a trail, a weathered headstone with one ominous word, a set of teeth buried in the earth, bones that lay silent for centuries, and yet, within them, a microscopic story was preserved, one that waited patiently for science to catch up. This isn't just about plague, it's about how much the past is still alive inside us, literally. The genetic fingerprints of Yersinia pestis are still out there today. In fact, the plague never truly disappeared. It still exists in natural reservoirs, in rodents across parts of Asia, Africa, and even the western United States. Today we have antibiotics. We have epidemiology. But the organism that once killed tens of millions hasn't gone extinct. It's just gone quiet. And that's part of the larger lesson. Nature doesn't forget. Evolution doesn't delete, it archives. Which is why the ability to build ancient pathogen family trees isn't just fascinating, it's revolutionary. We can now trace outbreaks like ancestral lineages. We can watch the mutation paths. We can pinpoint the exact moment a pathogen jumped from animal to human and went pandemic. That's what made the discovery in Kyrgyzstan so powerful. It wasn't only the presence of Yersinia pestis, it was its position on the tree. That strain was the origin, the trunk from which all the later branches sprang. To find it preserved so perfectly, in a place most historians hadn't even considered, reshaped the entire narrative. For years, scholars assumed China or Mongolia might be the origin point, given trade routes and earlier plague references. But the DNA told a different story. The spark was smaller, more hidden, but no less deadly. It's a reminder that history often unfolds quietly, unnoticed, until the aftermath is too big to ignore. And it also highlights something else. How much is still out there, waiting to be found? How many other cemeteries contain clues to the past? How many more forgotten footnotes in museum logs might hold the key to future breakthroughs? If one dusty archive in St. Petersburg held the genetic key to the world's most infamous pandemic, what else might be waiting in storage rooms, untouched collections, or untranslated inscriptions? The future of history may very well lie in its most overlooked corners. But there's also a human element to this story that shouldn't be ignored. Behind the science, behind the genomes and graphs, are people. Sanmak and his neighbors were real. They lived, worked, traded, and died, unaware that their lives would one day help solve a mystery that haunted the world for centuries. In a way, they've been given a strange kind of immortality. Their deaths, tragic as they were, now speak across time. Their bones became witnesses. And in honoring their story, we bring something full circle. Because the Black Death was never just a European tragedy. It was born in Central Asia. It traveled along global trade routes. It was, from the very beginning, a global phenomenon. That reframing matters. It reminds us that pandemics don't respect borders, that our fates are and have always been deeply entangled. One remote village's misfortune can ripple outward into a continent's collapse. One species' illness can become humanity's reckoning. And still, we persist. We adapt. We learn. So what now? What do we do with this knowledge? For starters, we embrace the idea that history and science are not separate. They are allies. The more we understand our past through modern tools, the better prepared we are for the future. We also remain vigilant. The world is more connected today than it's ever been. The same forces that carried the Black Death from Kyrgyzstan to the ports of Italy now move goods and diseases across the globe in hours, not months. We can't afford to be passive. We must study reservoirs, track mutations, invest in surveillance, and support research, not just when pandemics happen, but before they do. Because next time, there may not be a 100-year grace period. No stone inscription will warn us. No silent cemetery will wait politely to be discovered. We'll need to act faster, smarter, and we'll need to listen, not just to history books, but to the quiet data still buried in the earth. This discovery from Kyrgyzstan isn't just about solving a riddle from the past. It's a call to action for the present and the future. Because what we've learned is this: pandemics don't begin with chaos. They begin with silence, a mutation in a microbe, a change in the climate, a hunter's knife cutting into the wrong animal, a flea jumping from one species to another. And from that tiny, silent beginning, something ancient wakes up. That's how it happened in 1338. And it can happen again. But it also teaches us something else, something hopeful, that even centuries later we can reach back and find answers. That science can speak with the past. That forgotten people, buried in unmarked corners of the world, can still have something profound to say. And what they're telling us is this: nothing is disconnected. The graves near Lake Issyk-Kul weren't just local tragedies. They were the first domino in a global cascade. The Silk Road wasn't just a path for trade. It was a superhighway for microbes. Climate, ecology, migration, war, trade, all of it intertwined. That's the uncomfortable truth and the beautiful one. Our world is connected, deeply, intricately, inevitably connected. So if we want to protect ourselves from future pandemics, we need to think across boundaries, across disciplines, across centuries. Just like the team that cracked the origin of the Black Death, we need historians and scientists and field researchers working together. Because history isn't dead, it's not buried, it's not locked in books or museums. It's breathing beneath our feet. It's waiting in cemeteries we've never heard of, in bones we thought were silent, in DNA we never knew could speak. And when we listen, truly listen, we don't just learn about the past, we learn about ourselves. We see the cycles that repeat, the warning signs that echo, the resilience that endures. We remember that we've faced darkness before, and we made it through. So the next time you hear the word plague or think about pandemics, don't just think of statistics. Think of Sanmak. Think of the people who died not knowing that their suffering would help save others centuries later. Think of how knowledge is built, layer by layer, question by question, bone by bone. This is what it means to be human, to look back, so we can move forward with purpose. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the past, the present, or the way everything is connected, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are so many more discoveries, ancient and modern, that continue to reshape how we understand our world. Until next time, stay curious.